On September the 5th, 1972, one of the darkest events in the history of sport took place. 11 Israeli athletes and coaches competing at the Summer Olympics in Munich were taken hostage by terrorists of the Palestinian Black September group, who demanded the release of numerous prisoners being held in Israel. It ended in a shootout with all 11 Israelis, 5 Palestinians, and 1 German police officer dead. On that day, the broadcast team for the American ABC network provided live coverage to 900 million people around the world, making it the first time such an incident was broadcast live into people's homes. It led to radical changes in how current events are provided and consumed, for better or for worse. 2005's Munich told the story of the Mossad hit squad that was ordered by Prime Minister Golda Meir to hunt down the surviving Black September members involved and kill them. It dealt with the morality of retribution and self-preservation, and of the need and desire for states and politicians to be perceived as strong to the outside world. September 5 tells the story of the events of that day from the perspective of the broadcast crew, from the late night shift change, through the gunshots, calling everyone in, their questioning of the ethics of live broadcasting potential murders, all the way to the gunfight at the airport and the end of the day. It stars John McGarrow as Jeffrey Mason, the head of the control room, who's thrust into a situation for which he is out of his depth, but gradually puts everything together into what is still one of the most watched television events in history. Peter Sarsgaard is Rune Arledge, the head of ABC Sports, who has to balance the ambition of broadcasting the story with the ethics of how it should be framed and what can and can't be said and shown. Leonie Benesch plays Marianne Gebhardt, a German and Hebrew translator who acts as a conduit between the hacked radio transmission of the local police and her non-German speaking colleagues trying to get the story out. The vast majority of the film happens in the cramped, sweaty control room near the Olympic Village, with only a few quick shots of the characters standing outside in the fresh air. Like the people on that day, we are cut off from the outside world, experiencing the events on small monitors and TVs, and a radio that had been tweaked to pick up the local police chatter. Even Jim McKay, the anchor of the broadcast, is only ever seen clearly in archive footage. We see him in the studio a few times, but only obscured through blinds or briefly from behind. As the day unfolds, we experience a calm tension rather than excitable panic. As the early minutes unfold, characters are not running around shouting at each other, screaming things like, "This is real life." People get on with their jobs, have heated discussions, solve problems, and make mistakes. It reminds me of the 2011 film Margin Call, about an investment bank that, overnight, has to figure out what to do with some toxic mortgage-backed securities that have been discovered to be so bad that the bank has been constantly on the brink of collapse for an unknown length of time. Nobody screams at each other, nobody runs around, nobody jumps out of a window. It's a series of meetings in boardrooms with an ever-increasing number of attendees in smart suits, all trying to be right. I don't know the story of what happened, so I can't speak about the historical accuracy of the film. I believe it's mostly as it happened, though, as is always the case, real life doesn't follow a convenient narrative. Some things have been altered to make the story work on screen, and at 109 minutes the story isn't dragged out unnecessarily like so many films are these days. Most of the characters are the people who are there, but a couple of liberties have been taken. Marianne Gebhardt is an amalgamation of a number of people and is primarily there to represent the German nation on the day. She acts as a bridge between the two nations, effectively their true connection to the events outside. Also, being a woman surrounded by men in the 70s, she is a totem for the chauvinistic attitudes of the time. There are moral and ethical messages in this film, but they're not rammed down anyone's throats, like so many lesser films. For example, when a technician is trying to tweak the radio to pick up the police frequency, he asks Marianne to get a coffee. While she's out of the room, they pick up the police transmissions, and it's pointed out that they have no idea what's being said while she's getting the drinks. A couple of shots later, she's taking notes while listening to the radio, and he brings her a drink. That's it. No triumphalism, no dwelling on the casual sexism. It's clear what's being said, and they don't labour the point. The main focus of the moral dilemmas they go through is what happens if someone is shot on camera. Would it be okay to broadcast that? Is that legitimate news? These are questions that people still have yet to fully answer and are increasingly relevant in a world of 24 hours news cycles that need ratings and advertising revenues. They also wrestle with their personal responsibility, especially when they realise their broadcast accidentally reveals to the terrorists the police attempt to rescue the hostages. The film also deals with the naivety of the authorities and how unprepared they were for the incident. The police had no training beyond what they did that day to day, but it was hardly their fault either. It was unprecedented, and they did the best they could. 9 years later, a hostage crisis at the Iranian embassy in London ended with the precision assault by the British Special Forces Unit, SAS, rescuing all but one hostage alive and killed all but one terrorist. Munich was a wake-up call worldwide. This is an excellent film. Every character is played subtly and believably. John Magaro excellently portrays Jeffrey Mason as a young and inexperienced controller who has to bring everyone together and solve problems that no one in broadcasting had ever been faced with at that time. It's hard to imagine just how hard it was back then to get a live broadcast out to the world, and not just technically with the comparatively primitive satellites they had back then. Everything on the ground was novel and untested. It was a series of firefighting exercises they had to deal with to collect the information and disseminate to the world. Peter Sarsgaard is great as Rune Arledge, who wrestles his conscience with the nightmare unfolding and the opportunity it provides. British actor Ben Chaplin plays Marvin Bader, the head of operations who often clashes with Arledge and Mason about the ethics of the decisions they make, including the fateful announcement of the hostages' rescue, which turned out to be based on incorrect information. Leonie Benesch as Gebhardt displays a stereotype of German efficiency and stoicism until the end, when she acts as a representation of the Germans' despair at the horrors they had thought were a thing of the past. This is a period piece, and the production designer Gina Wagner has done a great job in recreating the technology of the time in all its dated style. The control room feels like a place that probably stank of sweat and cigarettes, where everyone is crammed in so tightly they could be sitting on each other. I'm sure some know-it-all will point out that something in the room wasn't available until 1974, or that something else couldn't be done with that thing because blah blah blah. It doesn't matter. We get the feeling of people working with the best technology they had at the time and figuring out how to do things on the fly under the high-stress situation of that day. The acting is top-notch, but not overly dramatic, which probably explains why there have been no acting nominations for the Oscars. In fact, it only got one nod for the screenplay. It's worthy, for sure, but I feel that Wagner's work should have been given some recognition. Ultimately, though, it doesn't really matter. This is what many would call Oscar bait, but not in the insufferable manner that so many other nominees have been accused of. It's a tight script, fantastically acted, and looks great. It's tense, dramatic at the right level, and you care about what the characters are going through and how they feel at the end. It was more than worth the big screen experience, and if it's still on where you are now, I thoroughly recommend you see it. Also, something popped into my head at the time. This all happened in 1972, 27 years from the end of World War II and Germany's great shame. 27 years ago, I graduated from university, a sobering thought about how much can change in a lifetime and how time flies by.